Hello, everybody. Uh, Welcome to this event. Thank you very much for joining us today. It's really a pleasure to have everybody here. I just say at the beginning, it's a pleasure to see people in person at an actual event again. It feels like a special occasion for all of us, so thank you for joining us. We have a wonderful, distinguished panel for you today. We are going to talk through many of the big issues around Japan, the business industry, how COVID is affecting many of these things, international relations. We're going to kick things off with some self-introductions from the gentlemen here. I'm not going to introduce them now because they'll do that themselves. After that, we're going to have a little bit of a discussion amongst ourselves, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. So we'd love to get your questions. That'll come later on in the evening. Okay, anyway, thank you very much. And why don't we kick things off, Julian? I think we're going to kick them off with you, please.
Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Julian Bayshore from McDermott, a US-based specialty chemical manufacturer. So first of all, thank you to the FCCJ for kindly inviting me to this panel. It's a true honor. And also, it's a wonderful event for the IT committee to raise funds for the benefit of the members, the press, and all the good work you do. I prepared a few slides here on the left or on the right, and I will control the slides right now. But I was educated in the United States. I spent my formative years in Pennsylvania, and I went to the University of Pennsylvania. I studied business at the Wharton School there. And I've worked in the United States for only 3 years, and then my employer at the time actually moved me to Japan in 1998. So I've been a country manager now for 3 different companies. 2 of the companies actually were established here. They had 50 years of experience here in Japan. And then one of my 3 employers, actually, I was hired as the first employee. I was a country manager from day one, but the only employee, and then I was given the opportunity to grow the business from ground zero. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later today. One interesting note, the last time I had an in-country boss was 2001, 2002. So for the past 20 years, as country manager, I've been reporting to bosses located offshore in other countries, which requires, I mention that because the special skill set that is involved in as country manager, you have to communicate your position and the needs of the Japanese customers and the employees to the United States headquarters or to the Asia Pacific regional headquarters as well. And there's a lot of issues involved in that communication, both good and bad. And then finally, I just want to note that I've always been a local hire, never an expatriate, but local hire earning Japanese yen the past few years. So I'll move on to my second slide. Again, I'll keep this very short. So a little bit of trivia. I've never worked for a Japanese company. The closest I came was I served on the board of a joint venture between an American company and a Japanese company. The Japanese company was established in 1883, I believe, and I served on that board for about 2 years. And that was my only experience. Other than that, I've been working for US and or European-based companies. So 90% of my career actually has been spent in Japan. Little did I know, I didn't know it, but at the time, but when I came to Japan in 1998, it was in the middle of the lost decade, which later became the lost decades. It's now been, I think we're in the third of the lost decades. It's a big, career-wise, there's a lot of risk actually as an American or as a non-Japanese being based here in Japan and spending so much time in here. And I survived many things, such as the 2008 Lehman shock. That was, as you recall, the global submortgage crisis, which in Japanese was called the Lehman shock. And then also I remained in Japan in 2011 during the big earthquake. At the time, there was a term called flyjin. Flyjin are some of our fellow compatriots who left or fled the country, and some of them never returned. But I sticked it out. I've stayed through that. But more important than the Lehman crisis or the earthquake was actually the yen, the dollar fluctuation, wild swings. From a very weak yen when I came, 147 yen to the dollar. The strongest point was 2011 when it was 76, and then today we're at 126. And during the first slide, I mentioned that I earned Japanese yen. So it's my income in U.S. dollars has fluctuated a lot over the past few years. But more importantly, as a country manager, the U.S. headquarters they look at the costs of having a country manager in Japan. So when the yen is very strong, I'm actually under more pressure because my costs in U.S. dollars are much higher. And then finally, moving on to my next slide. As I said, two of my three country manager positions, I took over a company in Japan which had more than 50 years of on-the-ground business. But it was really a classic change management or turnaround management. So country manager working for a multinational sometimes has to be an agent of change, which is a huge challenge here in Japan. And then, of course, there's issues with employee engagement, risks and rewards. I don't want to stereotype, but the Japanese employees tend to avoid risk, and sometimes rewards or carrots are not motivated by such rewards. So it's challenging as a country manager to get that engagement. And then matrix management just refers to a type of organizational structure where some employees in certain functions in Japan actually don't report to me, the country manager. They report to a functional boss located overseas. And with matrix management, it can be very challenging for country managers. And then winning now, winning later, it's just one of my philosophies that in order to keep my job as country manager, I need to have some quick short-term wins that I can show to the U.S. headquarters. Because in Japan, it takes years, the sales cycle is so long, it takes years to win new business. But you need to have little quick wins once in a while, and then you can convince the U.S. headquarters to hire more employees in Japan, to invest more in Japan, which then leads us to really winning later. And then in my position, just managing Japan, but if you want to continue the country manager experience in Japan like myself, you can. Also, you can manage all of Asia Pacific. Traditionally, managing Asia Pacific required you to live in places such as Singapore or Hong Kong or Shanghai. So that's one negative thing about spending a lot of time in Japan. Up until the pandemic, it's been difficult to manage all of Asia Pacific from northern Japan. And then finally, the last issue is the Great Resignation, which affected the United States first about a year and a half ago, but it's actually affecting Western companies and Japanese companies right now. And maybe I'll talk more about it later during the Q&A session. Vince?
Thank you. Can everybody hear me okay? Vincent Gibas. It's also an honor to be here today. My title slide seems to be a little bit washed out, but I guess I'm a little bit used to being washed out in Japan, so that matches quite well. I'll give a quick introduction to myself. I'll try to keep it short as well. Like Julian, I've also been in Japan for about 30 years now. I also, during my college experience, had some exposure and wanted to come back. And I plan to spend about 2 years in Japan, learn Japanese, be at a point where I could use it in a computer industry. And then, not only is, Japan so attractive, I think many people share that experience, but also in 1992, I was sort of still doing software programming, some engineering work. And I was working for a company called AT&T Gens. Which is a very tricky, it's not really a subsidiary of AT&T so much as kind of a stepchild. That's an interesting story in and of itself. But one day, one of the engineers we were working with walked in, and we were really struggling on products that we could do in Japan. And he said, hey, there's this really interesting thing going on in the US called internet. And so from that statement in a working meeting, AT&T Gens became the first internet services provider in 1992, starting kind of with email and then developing internet service in Japan. And so my career has really been shaped by that experience and having been a part of developing that industry over the last 25, 30 years. I moved on from AT&T. Our partner in the US was a company called PSINet. Which I moved to in 1994. I was a fourth employee outside of the US. And at the time, I went as an engineer. There was a very dynamic and powerful young guy at the time. I mean, he's about my age. At the time, we were young. But a guy named Joey Ito, who was the president of PSINet Japan at that time. And he was really, he also was a big shape in my career in that I got there, you know, and I was doing some customer support and some network engineering. And Joey was never there. And, you know, I'm like, Joey, hey, we got to start doing some work. And he said, hey, you know, he was busy working with politicians and the media, and financials and industry, and doing really pulling the sled, you know, the internet sled as hard as he could at the time. And he said, you're just going to have to run the company. So, so that's how I got my introduction to management and did my best. And, you know, through the bubble years with a lot of investment and a lot of hard work from a lot of young people, we were successful in taking that 4-person company to a lot of acquisitions, really. $100 million, you know, 230-person company in Japan in 1999. And it was only a year until we went bankrupt. In the US, Chapter 11 in 2000, I think most of you are still old enough to remember the internet bubble and it's sort of how that went. And I had my only experience in my career working in the US was in 2000, January 2000, the stock had split. My daughter was born, and I was being asked to come back and take a CTO role at PSINet in the US. So we packed up our bags and, you know, moved to the US in May of 2000. We got off the plane, and the funniest thing, I looked at the stock price, and it had dropped by like about 35%. And so that was sort of a quick jaunt back to the US. And so after that, you know, everybody's trying to pick up the pieces and figure out what they're doing. And because we had, you know, two things, we had a really great team in PSINet Japan, the guys who helped build the company with me, and there was a real need for security services. More and more companies started joining the internet, connecting to the internet. Real need for security services, and so we started a company called Radio Secure Networks, which was really at the time. It was really something new. It was a subscription-based, service-based security service in 2001. And the secret, you know, the reason that company was so successful, not only was all the talent on the team, but it was the moment in Japan when they kind of changed to broadband internet. And so we had a product that could do security with broadband connections. We'd been in the communication space. We knew all the players, and they all needed something to sell. And I think one of the secrets or, you know, things that I've learned over the years is, well, of course, timing is everything. But it's also the ability to solve the problems of your partners is always the number one, you know, key for me to success. When you're working with people who have sales routes and they have the ability to touch the customers and you solve their problems, that's a key to having successful sales, I think, in Japan. That's really something I was able to learn. And then, so that went quite well. 2006, we did a successful IPO. You know, I made a little bit of money. I hung out with Esteban a little bit. You know, we tried our hand at a couple of things. And 2010, I started this company called Objective Ventures with all these great ideas of going to the application space. We could all see SaaS is coming. You know, a lot of great ideas. And then, you know, looking back, I always had this phrase, whenever any problem happened in the company, I had this phrase I always said, what's the worst that could happen? You know, we got to move forward. We got to go forward. We know there's risks. We just have to do it. And that's really been kind of one of the secrets to how I got there. But in 2011, I had made a bunch of money, and, you know, I had started doing some investment in this and that. And in March 2011, I had a very large portion of my, you know, huge fortune in the nuclear power industry. And by the end of March 2011, that was, I won't say it's gone, but my life changed dramatically. And I really learned, when you say what's the worst that can happen, I really learned, okay, we got there. So that was probably the biggest thing I learned in terms of financial management. So anyone who has newly, you know, done an IPO, please come talk to me afterward, and I'll give you some advice on that one. So the last 10 years has been building on relationships, doing a lot of international consulting, and development projects for our customers in Japan. And then recently, starting about a week ago, I took a new role as CTO of a company called Digital Garage. And this again is, I just want to roll back to Joey Ito once, because this is a company that he had started way back in the day, and he and I have kept in a little bit of touch. And I knew that he was back in Japan, asked him, hey, what's going on, anything interesting? And that ended up in me getting this new role. So I'm really looking forward to this new step in my career. And I guess I have control. So a couple things, just very generalizations. I think everyone here has had the same experience that I have. And one of the key things that always, whenever we're doing any international project or bringing the business to Japan, the decision-making gap and the amazing number of times that you find key management on both sides of an international venture who have agreement on goals and timelines, but then once you try to execute on that, the Japan team is very going into the detail of how that's going to be executed. So how big a piece is that when you're actually doing the implementation of any international business. Another thing that I took away is in Japan industry, when I first came to Japan, there was a book which had been made popular by a guy named Lee Iacocca, who was in the automobile in the industry in the US and had this theory that the Japanese market was very, very protectionist and impossible for foreign companies to enter. And what I realized, or what my sort of take on that was after doing some business here, is that it's not so much that there's protectionist versus any specific person. It's that when there's an establishment in an industry in Japan, it tends to become very rigid. And it's very hard for new players to come into that. And my successes in internet side or security side, these were new industries where there's very little established rules and anything that could block you. And so that's been a big part of my success. But what I realized, it doesn't tend to be, in my experience, anything about Japan domestic or foreign. I'm sure that's there somewhere, but it's much more about how you fit into the existing players and ecosystem that's been developed in Japan. And the other interesting thing is how arbitrary the rules can see sometimes. One of the things about PSINet Japan was actually we were the first foreign internet company, at least. There's another company called KVH about the same time to apply for and receive what was called at the time a Type 1 telecommunications license. And this is a license to allow you to actually own infrastructure in Japan, own your own infrastructure and run services on top of that. And I remember in 1999, we were working to get this, and we're dealing with the government, the Ministry of Posts and Telecoms, very, very hard to get them to. There was no precedent, and so we were going through telecommunications laws, trying to figure out. And the person we were dealing with was quite adamant that we had this difficulty and that difficulty. And then March turned to April, and the guy who was in charge of us changed due to just regular organizational change. And it was the second meeting. We were going through these issues. Oh, that's not a problem. This is no problem. Yeah, it'll be fine. And we had a license, about 6 weeks later, I think. So it's really, there's a conservatism for people who have to make decisions, I think, and a structure in Japan. I think that's really important to realize that dealing with those, people directly and working through those issues, there's usually a way through. It was quite interesting and quite educational for me at the time. Okay, I think I'm going to skip these because we're going to get these in the Q&A. And then the other two panelists also had some challenges, so just take a minute. My challenges is, as Julian, I also hadn't worked really for anyone for the last 20 years or so. So now that I'm in Digital Garage and I have someone I'm reporting to, that's a new thing for me, which I'm excited about. And another thing, just when I was in PSINet, and as the company grew, and we became, larger and larger. What started as a bunch of young guys building this business, a lot of telco executives, a lot of hiring sort of on top of us to build the structure of the company as it grew. And I just remember being in those meeting rooms and these, gentlemen and ladies coming in, and they're giving us all their experience and really, how can I say, professionalizing our business. But going through the, the meetings and what we actually do, I remember saying to myself, do these guys have any idea, what we're doing? And that came back to haunt me last week, sitting in the Digital Garage meeting room for, on my third day, and going through one of these, technical meetings as a newly joined CTO. And as I started to impart my, knowledge and experience on a specific point, I just saw the eyes looking back to me and said, oh shit, I'm the old guy. And, so that's going to be a challenge for me, but I'm looking forward to it. And then lastly, Web3, the chance to go back and work with Joey a little bit. At the time, he was pulling the internet sled. He's continued to pull sort of the distributed computing and the artificial intelligence sled. And at the moment, he's really pulling the Web3 sled quite hard. And Web 1 was all about publishing information and making it available for everyone. And Web 2 was really about collaborating and sharing that information amongst ourselves. But Web 3 is all about attaching meaning to that information and allowing that information to be digital assets and become really a part of our day-to-day culture and society. And that's going to be a game changer in the same way that the original internet was a game changer. It's really going to change everything. And so, back at the beginning, it's a little ways off, but I'm really, really looking forward to being part of that. And again, thank you everybody for the time today. I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay.
Yep.
So let me try to introduce myself. So first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to this panel, and I'm glad to talk to you in front, and I'm honored to be here. And actually, recently, I always work from home, and I present at the front of the PC and actress light, Joyu light. And so today it's very fresh for me to be in the position here and talk to you face to face. Okay, so let's move to the first slide. So my name is Shinichi Komeda. So I am the only Japanese of the panelists here today, and I grown up purely in Japan, and so I started my career at 1999 at Microsoft Japan, and at the time, so I worked with the software engineer, and I learned English during my new development project of the CRM, and I worked daily with Hyderabad Indian team, and I try to talk a little bit more English day by day, and after the 1 year, I learned the Indian English. So my first English, learned English is Indian. So, but I try to adjust with other the area, and now, I can speak English. And so the first 8 years, I worked as a software engineer, and the 2/3 of my career is at marketing. And so I talked to you a little bit more later, but after that, I moved to the unicorn company, American-based unicorn company, RPA, named Automation Anywhere, for 2 years. And so after that, I moved to Fujitsu 1 year ago, and now I'm working for the transformation of the entire global marketing. Actually, as you may or may not imagine, Fujitsu becomes a very global company, and especially for the marketing department, it's global, and half of the people is located outside Japan. And my team also has a lot of people outside, and I always talk with English to them in front of PC. I've never met them, face to face, because I moved to Fujitsu during the COVID. So, and move to the next slide. It's the slide about me and the starting new business in Japan. And this slide shows the why that I'm here today with you for the panelists. And I have 3 major experience for the new business in Japan. So first thing is that when I was a product manager at Microsoft Japan, I launched the very first cloud product, which is now called the Microsoft 365, and I'm the first product manager. And at that time, no one knows that the cloud products, and most of the people still sell the on-premise software. And I was told that hey, that you should not sell the cloud because that they want to sell the on-premise. And that when I try to propose the cloud, then no one will purchase the on-premise. So I got the many complaints from the sales team about that. And during that, I have many unique experience for the launching in the business Japan, which I can talk later. But that's my first experience of the launching the business in Japan. And my second experience is that I moved to the Azure partner business in Microsoft, and there I met Esteban-san as well, and I am in the role of the recruiting the partners, so including the Japan startup and also the startups from the American or the other foreign countries. And I compared a lot of startup business and and find that there is some the loads and tendency for the success or the failure. So that's my second experience. And the third one, my third one is that when I was moved to Automation Anywhere. So Automation Anywhere itself is a startup unicorn for the RPA. And so I myself moved to the startup and doing the business. So this is my third experience. And the interesting thing is that the several companies move from the foreign countries to Japan to start business. And I can also talk a little bit more later. But I also saw that there is some different strategy for entering into Japan, and also how to compete with the local business. So that's what it is. And so the last slide is that about my recent challenges. So the first one is about purpose carving. I'm not sure if you already heard about the purpose. Recently, as you may know, that many companies try to set their own company's purpose. And at Fujitsu, Fujitsu set their company's purpose that make the society more sustainable by building a trust through the innovation. So that's the Fujitsu's purpose. And the purpose carving itself is that try to find your own purpose, why you are living, why you are working. And looking into that purpose, Fujitsu's purpose, I set my own purpose as make the Japan great again through innovation. You may hear this kind of a phrase somewhere. So, but this is my own purpose. And the second one is that so actually Fujitsu is my first Japan company's experience. And when I moved to Fujitsu, I had the experience of a lot of difference between the American-based company and the Japan-based company. And as Vincent taught before, there's some different decision process going forward. And usually that in an American-based company, communication is usually the top down, but many people escalate the things to the top management. It's the mutual communication, but for the Japan's company, usually it's a top down only, and few people blame that escalates. And that is one, and another one is as for the management decision process. It's for the American-based company, it's very clear for the division of the responsibility. And while that in Japan's management team, they also have a clear role defined, I think. But decision process is a little bit different, and it's kind of the decision by all, not by the single person. and that makes me a little bit funny for sometimes. When we try to push back to the management team, what happens is that because they want to collaborate and came to decision by all, they will compromise. So, but the American-based company never compromise. So that's what I see as a difference. And the last one is that, so in Fujitsu, I'm now working in a global environment. And actually, that the HQ function, there's a lot of people, outside people, and there's a 3 time zone distribution. That in Fujitsu, that in the marketing team, so there's another big team in Europe, based on the UK and in Germany. And also some people located in America, Dallas. And working with 3 time zones is a little bit hard, so I have to wake up early and also work at very late at night. So it's a little bit hard. So this is my recent challenge. So this is all about my introduction. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Komeda-san. Thank you to all the panelists for your introduction. Those were very, very good. I meant to say at the beginning, I'm Peter Hallstrom, by the way. I don't have slide presentations, but I will be the questioner for this session. And our host encouraged that I ask some very tough questions of our guests so that we can get into some of the richness of this discussion. And it's great to see how much experience we have here, too. We have experience at big companies and small companies and startups. We have experience with Japanese companies and non-Japanese companies operating in many different cultural experiences, too. And also, it sounds like you've all worked at different levels of the organization, too. My day job is I'm an editor at Bloomberg News, and my team covers technology in the Asia-wide area. So many of these subjects are of very high interest. Relevant to this panel, I also sit on the board of the FCCJ, so I've been given the role of asking questions here. We talked at the beginning about one theme to kick things off, and I think everybody will have some examples to talk about this, but we want to begin things by talking about fantastic failures or companies that have come into Japan, thought that they were going to be able to do really well, and then failed for whatever reason. And I want to go into that theme, which we talked about before. But before we do that, Vince, you talked about something that's too tantalizing. We need to talk about it. You mentioned this great anecdote about a foray into nuclear power and something that went wrong. And I think if we're going to talk about fantastic failures, you should probably enlighten us and tell us about the experience.
So lesson 1 is don't ever do derivatives. If someone says the word derivative, don't do that. And lesson 2 is when you say what's the worst that can happen, right? And especially when you've been repeatedly you've had success by taking risks, I think. But then on March 11th, 2011 March, there was an earthquake, and that wasn't at that moment everyone in the room lost a lot of money, just in terms of market value over the next 2 days. But subsequent to that earthquake, there was a major nuclear incident in Japan, which led to the turning down most of the nuclear power in Japan, which none of those things, I was not directly invested in any of those specific things, but due to the way that I had structured some financial things, it led to complete loss of liquidity of things. It was a 2-week. It was a disaster for everyone, right? That's the least of anyone's problem is that. But for me personally, it was a sort of a lesson in humility, I think, as when you say what's the worst that could happen, you really should consider there can be a disaster at any time, and learning to plan for that is an important part of our, as leaders of organizations as well, understanding that you do not have control over things that happen. What's happening in the world today as well, many people around me have things, whether it's supply chain or whether it's something else, the things that we are watching on the news every day really affecting business at all levels. So it's really about planning.
Okay, thank you for sharing it.
Sorry, I didn't mean to.
Yeah. But Why don't we dive into this theme of fantastic failures, and perhaps we can start with you, Vince, and then we'll go around to the other teams. But please, talk to us about what you think have been some
It's
outstanding
interesting
examples.
because probably my largest success was actually the largest failure, and that was at PSINet. So PSINet, over the 4.5, 5 years that I was working with that company in Japan, as I mentioned, we went from 4 people and really riding the bubble is how we got so big. But the first year, thanks to Joey and thanks to the work of the executives when they brought the company to Japan, we had a strategic partnership lined up with one of the, maybe the first or second largest trading company, Japanese trading company. And so this was early days. This was maybe 95. And really before internet had really taken off at all. But we could all see it coming, including them. And Japan, as always, they're a little bit behind in terms of building and launching these internet businesses. But our counterparts, which fairly high up in one of the largest companies in the world, they were all about how are we going to work with PSINet to launch this business in Japan. And so, as came out, I think in Komeda-san's comment and also Julian's comment, from the U.S. sometimes we have this top-down perspective that if the two tops are saying yes, we're going to do this, then it'll happen. But this was where I learned about once you build the team and you start diving into the details, and our meetings went something like, nice introduction, this internet thing's going great, you can't wait to do it. And then, okay, so what's the next step? Well, the next step is we have a partnership. And what we'd really like to do is start selling to your 10,000 subsidiaries. Because at that moment, we're the largest internet provider in Japan, if we could, do that. And they're like, well, but, how does it work? What is it that we'll do that'll make them buy it? And it's like, a year from now, everyone in the country is going to have internet. So we just got to knock on the door and take it. But we couldn't get past their business case to their management, even though the management was completely bought in, partly due to my own, naivety as an engineer who's just, coming into a business leadership role. Just everyone agrees that this is something that's going to happen and something that if we execute properly, we can succeed at. But yet they were looking for market data. On how this was going to be a success, and there was no market data because there was there's 10 companies connected. So this was that ended up in a year and a half of wonderful meetings that never turned into a business. And so for me personally, that was a huge failure. And if it hadn't been for changing the way that we thought about how to build and sell the products, PSINet would have ended at that moment, I think, because there was a lot of money going into sustaining a business that wasn't going anywhere.
And Komeda-san, do you want to talk about what you see as a fantastic failure?
Well, I'm not sure if this is a fantastic or not, but what I would talk about my experience of the previous company, so the RPA company, and the thing is that so one of the key factor is that whether the company want to invest more on Japan or not. And that's a minimum requirement to succeed in Japan. The reason why is that usually for other East Asian countries like Singapore or the Korea or the Thailand or the usually for example American company try to set up the HQ Asia HQ on Singapore and try to have a satellite office and put only few people at the locally. But as for the Japan, we have to put large resources there. Otherwise, because Japan's customers are demanding, and sometimes they arrest people when they get the trouble by our products. And I also had the experience that, this is my experience in Microsoft when I try to launch the cloud business. Usually at the time that the cloud stops and have a trouble, and then that many customers have complaints and try to come to me and hey, come to the site and try to resolve the problem until that it's and usually that the sales guides are captured by the one single customer when there is a trouble, and at that time, no one can care other customers, and they try to, be treated locally at Japan. So that's one very important point, and they also have need a support, technical support locally here in Japan, and she or she have to treat locally the customer, and because that other Japan's local competitor are doing that just because that. So they are treated in that way, and as such that the foreign players also have to compete with that behavior. That is one. And my automation area, fortunately, invested that and have 100 people locally, and that clears. And the second one I saw is that the timing of entering into Japan. So that is the second point I saw as a very critical point. RPA is exponentially growing up business, and half year or the 1 year gap of the between the competitor has a very critical problem. So because they are growing up exponentially. And my experience is that actually automation anywhere entered into Japan market 1 year after the competitor called UiPath, and it was very hard to try to fill the gap of the market share. So actually the same thing would happen for other industry. What I saw is like Uber Eats and Demaikan versus Food Panda. So that is also in the similar situation. So what I saw is that when you decide when you decide not to come to Japan earlier, then you usually fails. So that's what I found.
Oh. Hey, I'm sorry, could you tell us more about Automation Anywhere? You're saying that they were particularly good at building up a local sales force that was able to kind of catch up, eventually help their business. Is it?
Yes. Yes. Actually, I forgot to introduce the overview of the Automation Anywhere. So Automation Anywhere is the second biggest RPA company worldwide, and Automation Anywhere competes with UiPath. So who recently did the first IPO in major RPA vendors, and also we have a big local competitor who is called so that the NTT Group hosts the products called the Win Actor, and the share of them is also big, and there's several other big competitors there. So in the RPA market, there's a very random and big competition in place, and also that the market growth is tremendous. So it's the fastest grow market in the IT industry. So that's the characteristics.
Great, thank you. And Julian, if we can.
Sure.
continue.
Yeah. Thank you, Peter, for the question regarding fantastic failure. So
Please.
when I moved to Japan in 1998. I would buy food as a consumer at locally owned grocery stores. And for decades up until then, the Japanese government protected such the food retail industry, and we didn't have the choices like we have now. But things changed in 2000 when that large store retail law was changed, and it allowed these large mega retailers to come to Japan, or also Japanese retail supermarkets to build these massive grocery stores. And Carrefour entered the market at that time. At the time, they're headquartered in France, the world's second largest mega retailer. And with great fanfare, they came to Japan in 2000 and opened up about 8 mega supermarkets over a 5-year period. But in 2005, they retreated from the Japanese government, from the Japanese after only 5 years. So many reasons. One reason was the location. They were located really far from the train station, and their target customer is someone who buys groceries every day. But as you know, Japanese consumers, including myself, buy groceries almost every day. But we tend to walk, at least especially in urban areas, we tend to walk to those supermarkets. But Carrefour's 8 locations were really located far away from train stations, and they didn't have large parking lots at a time. They also didn't sell any French food, and a lot of Japanese consumers, they like the aura of Carrefour. They're expecting to buy some French ingredients and French cuisine, but Carrefour Japan decided just to offer Japanese made food, fruits and vegetables, and really they didn't differentiate themselves from the other Japanese supermarkets. So that was a big. I think that would be a fantastic failure.
And now you see Picard is coming into the Japanese market quite aggressively,
Yes.
trying to bring. I think they're leading with their French food. In
Correct.
fact.
Yes.
One failure that I wanted to mention and raise, and then I'd like to ask each of you sort of the lessons from some of these failures. One that struck me was the Vodafone experience in Japan. So Vodafone came into the Japanese market, bought one of the smaller wireless carriers to compete with NTT Docomo and KDDI. They spent $20 billion. It was a big investment for them. Vodafone was based in London at the time and was actually quite competitive, I think, globally. They came in, they wasted their $20 billion, and then they had to sell to SoftBank and Masayoshi Son because they had essentially failed. They couldn't gain any market share. And what struck me was that they failed, and SoftBank was able to succeed almost right away afterwards, with big help, I guess, from Apple, because they got exclusive rights to the iPhone at the time, and they kind of strategically did the right thing. But it was a huge risk for SoftBank at the time. It was a huge embarrassment for Vodafone. And SoftBank was able to end up turning that into, the gold mine, essentially, that's let him finance his $100 billion venture capital fund. So given the experiences that you guys know about and that you've talked about here, what are some of the lessons that you would draw? If you were giving advice to a country chief or a CEO who's looking at coming into Japan, what are the lessons that you would draw about what you should not be doing as you're coming into the market? And then we're going to talk about successes after this. Please, go ahead.
What should not be? Oh, well, in the case of Carrefour, it's possible they didn't do enough research on the Japanese market. They didn't put much thought into the market research. I spoke earlier about country managers, but really having the right people in place to lead the operations in Japan, especially from the get-go, from when you're building it from scratch. There must have been some issues at the time, and it seems that in Carrefour's case, the French headquarters had a really strong control of what happened in Japan, but those French or the headquarter people do not understand really the needs of the Japanese consumers. The fact that they like to walk to supermarkets, things like that, which contribute to it being a fantastic failure.
Okay.
I would agree. It's really, knowing the market is a thing that, it sounds so obvious, but a failure that I think see over and over is the method of knowing the market is not just about going to a marketing company and doing, market research and trying to match what you get from the research with the product mix. And I think this is, you can see strategically or you can see theoretically how, something like a large supermarket offering better pricing, for instance, and that, that it seems like such a good idea until you consider that, most people don't spend any money on transportation. The draw would be the foreign products in the first place. And so it's easy to get locked into foreign, native market thinking and applying that to a market that you just don't know enough about. And I don't want to steal from Komeda-san because I have a feeling he might bring up this point as well. But one of the things that he mentioned, which I've seen over and over, and I'd like to take a question back to Julian later about his experience about being employee number one, is that Japanese customers are extremely demanding. And they demand, especially they have some cases of foreign companies pulling out of the market quickly. And so there's a little bit of a lack of trust, whether they'll get, so if something goes wrong, will someone take care of me? Will this product still be around? And I think the investment that's required in supporting your customers is something that's not always, seen at the beginning. So maybe I'll turn it, I'm sure Komeda-san also wants to make a similar point, but.
Yeah,
Please,
Thank you. So I totally agree with Vince. So that the Japan's customer is very demanding and unique in the sense of the quality, and they believe that Japan's quality is number one in the world. It depends in the products though in reality, but so that we at least need to put some good resources in Japan. Or we have to have a good partnership locally in Japan. So in the case of the Vodafone, I think that one of the failure of the Vodafone is that about the quality of the line, but also I think that after they are purchased into the SoftBank, who is a partner, they did a great job to be successful. So I think that the local partnership is also crucial, and especially for the the company who is entering into the Japan and has not enough resource to do research or going around locally. It's very crucial to have a very good partnership locally. Find someone like a SoftBank to do the business together.
I want to follow up on one thing that both of you touched on, and that's understanding the market and making sure that you don't sort of import your thinking from your home market into Japan. I think from the American standpoint, often it's like, well, if the product is less expensive, I'll go ahead and buy it. But I think it takes more sophisticated understanding, and yet companies continue to get it wrong again and again and again. First of all, why is it so hard to understand what Japanese customers want, whether it's individuals or corporations, and how would you suggest that this entrant would go about finding that out? Because often they won't tell you. They just won't tell you. Like, you need to figure it out. Whoever wants to go, please.
Yeah. So I think it's a good question. So there's probably several answers behind, but I would like to point out that the nature of the Japanese people is very conservative. Basically, they don't want to do something in advance of other people. That is one, and they try watching to other customer trying the first product, and then if it's successful, then follow them. So in that sense, that the very first customer you try to acquire is very important. So it will be it will be the nice case study for other Japanese customers in case of the B2B business. That many customer may follow. But it depends on the quality of the first customer, for example.
I'd like to make a comment, and then I'd like to sort of ask Julian about his experience. But I think there's one thing, and especially for a specific size of company. I think if you're talking about an automobile maker or cloud Amazon type of company, there's a lot more experience and resource that they have to bring to bear. But I think when even a little bit smaller, Japan is a very expensive investment, and I think if you're starting with a team that doesn't have experience here, of course you have your own background. And what happens in many cases that I've seen is you go and you look for that beachhead on the ground, and one thing that can happen is, first of all, the language. So if you find someone that you have good communication with, in my experience, sometimes we tend to prioritize that over the real experience, whether it be business or marketing, whatever it might be. If we are able to communicate freely, we feel like that's very clear and precise communication. We might assign someone to be, okay, you're the guy that's in charge of this, and a lot of times that person may have great connections as well. But that's not the same thing as having true, market understanding, right? And what it can lead to is you try to get some big deals, but you don't really attack it as marketing. I'm very interested. Julian mentioned that he had the experience of being the first guy, guy one. And in my experience, a lot of times it's so hard, it's almost impossible to make that work. So
Sure.
I'm really interested to hear about it.
Sure. Yeah, being for one of my 3 positions in the past, I was the first employee in Japan as the country manager from day one. But you know what, Vincent? What was not difficult, winning business from the Japanese with no presence in Japan, actually that was not so difficult. What was difficult was educating the headquarters overseas about why things are being done in Japan the way they are. So I spent a lot of time not defending Japan, but just educating the management overseas about why things in Japan move so slowly at a glacial pace. But they knew that they wanted to do business in Japan, so that was a good thing. So for my other 2 employers, it's a little bit easier because they both have been in Japan for over 50 years, and I don't have to spend so much time educating. But the issues I have, working for a company with a long presence in Japan is when we introduce new products, the latest products or latest innovations. Our Japanese customers, they don't want to be the first to use this innovative chemical product that we offer. They would love to be the second or the third. So that's the challenge I have. Whereas, in China, my company, we have, of course, country manager there. That person is able, they have many Chinese companies raising their hand. They want to be the first to use that innovative product. Because a little back, I was talking about risk aversion, which seems to be innate in the Japanese psyche or DNA. But that has been a really difficult issue. So what I do is I look for these, I call them local opinion leaders in the industry that I want to attack, and I want to introduce my company's latest product. And I try to befriend that person and get him or her to bless my product. And then after that, it's much easier to win new business. Yeah.
So
Thanks for the question.
You deal a
I don't
lot
know if I
with-
answered your.
No, that's
your
good. That's
concern.
great. So you deal a lot with corporate customers,
B2B,
and they
yes.
want to know often who's already using the product.
Yes.
So if you're just beginning in the
Yes.
market, it's hard to have that
Correct.
first reference.
Correct. And
Customer.
as an American company, we introduce our latest products also to U.S.-based companies and China-based companies. But the reference list customers have little value. They're not so meaningful to the companies in Japan. They want to know which Japanese companies. But how can they? This is the latest product. Of course, you're the first. I'm introducing this product to you first. So of course, there's no reference list yet in Japan.
That's very interesting. Okay, let's turn the tables to successes because we want to talk about those, and then in a short while we'll open it up to Q&A. But let's talk about success stories that you guys see as important and perhaps telling in explaining how a company did successfully navigate in Japan and win over their market. And whoever wants to go first.
Maybe I'll go first, just sticking to my example in the food retail business. So Costco, I would view that as a success story. They also entered Japan 1999-2000 timeframe, same time as Carrefour, but not at a lightning speed. They opened the first location in Fukuoka, far away from Tokyo, and it was more in the experiments. They made a lot of mistakes there, but they learned from those mistakes, and then they opened the second warehouse or supermarket, and to this day I think they have 30 locations here in Japan, but only one in China. Interesting. Whereas Carrefour was very successful in China, and then they tried to copy and paste that model here in Japan, but they failed. But one thing, so Costco, they knew, first of all, their target customer are Japanese families who have cars. So they built their warehouses far away from the train station, which is no problem because their target customer owns cars and buys not every day, but maybe once a week or less often. And furthermore, Costco built huge parking lots to be able to accommodate all that traffic. And furthermore, unlike Carrefour, they decided to have a lot of American foods, or unique, which are considered unique to the Japanese palate. And I think that was one success story.
Komeda-san.
Okay. So for the success stories about the flip side of the failure, right? So that for example, as for the investment, the very important thing is that to invest to the Japan's market. So because we cannot just copy and paste from other markets to Japan because it's a little bit unique, and we have to invest to some extent until that they get a certain percentage of the share. And if they reach to the certain percentage of the share, then that the sales become stable. But until then, for example, they need a local development team, or at least that the HQ management understands the situation in Japan. And to do that, what I usually observe is that the Japan's team try to invite the HQ management team to Japan for a while. For example, 1 year, or if it's very difficult, then stay there. Try to ask them for stay for 2-3 months at least to learn about the Japan's market, and go to the customer site together and get their feedback directly to have a atmosphere. And have a shared atmosphere of the what the Japanese customer try to say. So that kind of the communication, direct communication between the HQ management and Japan's team and the customer is one of the key things, I believe.
I think for me there was one that stands out because it was so surprising to me, and that's Amazon Web Services. And I remember back in sort of 2008, 2009 when AWS came to Japan, and I was not just thinking to myself but saying to everyone who would listen, is there's just no way that a credit card pay-as-you-go service can make it in an environment where there's this rigid budgeting, very strict control of how things are purchased. I just had no concept that could succeed so quickly. But in fact, there were two things, whether by design or just by the nature of how the AWS system works. The first being that because Amazon has a free tier, you can sign up with basically no risk. You need to put in a card, but I mean, it may be the MIS guy, right? The system guy just putting in his own personal card and buying free tier service. Or maybe if it's a smaller company, just, take my card out of my wallet and do that. And so they did have, some level of, in fact, the effect of it is it allowed companies and people in the companies to bypass the normal budget control. So this thing, which was a huge block to selling new services, actually by virtue of allowing online purchases directly from the user, it actually ended up being, today we say things like shadow IT, but in fact what happened was that created an immediate, expanding user base. And the second thing I didn't really consider, but which is fascinating, is Japanese IT infrastructure traditionally has been done by what we call system integrators, IT services company, who the larger companies especially, they don't tend to do a lot of the system work themselves. They tend to outsource that. And what the interesting thing about this credit card purchasing model is that it gave a place for ancillary companies to provide a service. So even though the systems themselves are being done by AWS, the IT partner can do the actual design and building and operation of the system, and also they can continue to bill their customer based on however they want to do the costing on their side. So, but for me, I never expected that AWS could start so quickly here, but it was within 2 years they really had gained mind share. Maybe not market share just yet, but they had the mind share. And if you look at how financial and other industries have really taken to cloud. In some ways, it's been faster than many other markets. So that was extremely surprising and really success story for me.
That's a good one. Yeah, there are a few that you made me think of as you were talking about it. There's AWS and then Amazon, the retail business itself. I mean, it came into a market that Rakuten kind of owned, and Amazon now has the majority share. I think it's the mid 60% share in Japan. It's been very successful with that as well. Apple, of course, has been successful with the iPhone. And one that's surprising to me, and I'd like to ask you guys about this, because Komeda-san, you were saying that you can't just cut and paste your model. Starbucks came into a market where there were really good coffee shops. I mean, they're really good coffee chains. They're really good craft coffee places. Starbucks came in, they kept the same gigantic sizes, same prices, and they're all over the place. I just looked it up. There are 1,500 stores now in Japan, very, very successful. So it seems like there are some cases where you're cutting and pasting a model that does end up resonating with Japanese consumers, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on why that one worked and if that is transferable or is that just a one-off?
Yeah, I agree that as Peter mentioned that there's some cases. So basically, that the successful company is having the business model like globally homogeneous but locally adaptive, and this the ratio of the adaptive is the problem, right? And for the Starbucks case, yes, the model seems like very similar, but at the same time, what I found for the Starbucks is that actually they are not hosted by the Starbucks HQ, but they are the franchised in Japan. And that means that the local company, they partner with the local company to enter to the Japan market. And so I think that, because they are the retailer, for example, that, face-to-face communication with the customer in the store is very important, for example, and they educate their staff on on their own, like, so that kind of thing could be changed from global standard, but yeah, in the core part of the business model, I think it's the same.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. I think we're ready to go to Q&A in just a moment. Okay, we have people already ready. I have one more question for you guys too, so hopefully we'll have some time. But please, why don't you come here and you can use this microphone. And if there's anybody else who wants to ask a question, you can grab the other microphone too. But please go ahead.
Thank you. They should state their name, maybe.
Oh yeah, please state your name and your company.
Yes, I appreciate this fascinating discussion from every panelist. Thank you very much. My name is Waing Mizuno. I think this is better. Okay, I read my question here because I've been listening, and I think it's a lot of questions I should ask. But here, I would raise up my first question to Mr. Bishwar. And this could be a little bit difficult because I'm not sure if your old boss is listening here or not. But I need you to be honest with us. My question is, you mentioned that you were hired 3 times as country manager. Is there any triggers at the timing that you choose to change your job? And be honest.
Sure, that's a good question. I'm not really a job hopper by nature. Since graduating from school, I've worked for 3 employers, and I'm averaging 9 years at each one. But every time, Ms. Mizuno, every time I think this is the one. I'm going to stay at this company until 60, 65. But things happen along the way. Sometimes opportunities arise where I can. It's a trade-off. Do I stay at my current employer, or where I know how I can be promoted if I succeed, if I work hard, or do I accept an opportunity where I can immediately, be at a much senior level than my previous employer? And also, life changes. Like the birth of my daughter 13 years ago, that was another factor. I happened to leave my employer at the same time, so little things like that. Buying land in Japan and then building a home, having a 35-year mortgage at super low interest rates, but things like that can motivate you. Keep in mind I'm a salaryman, so I've always worked as a salaried employee. but there's a lot of issues. As a country manager or legally the representative director, it's very easy for an employer to terminate the employment of the country manager. So there's more pressure on me. So Japan doesn't have what's called at-will employment like we have in the United States. It means basically employees in Japan are protected by the labor law. But the representative director is technically not an employee by Japanese labor law. So there are a lot of issues like that. But thank you very much for your question.
Any other questions? I can keep going. I'm a journalist. I can keep asking questions. But if you have more, please go ahead. Okay, I'm going to ask one in the meantime, and then I have one to finish also. Vince, you had raised this question about the Great Resignation and how it had. Oh, Julian raised. Excuse me. You'd raised the point that the Great Resignation, which has gotten much attention in the U.S. in particular, has begun to come to Japan. And I'd love to hear more about that and what you think that means for the workforce, because I think, as you were just talking about, there's a special status for the salaried employees. Employees tend not to change, and that leads to some rigidity in the labor markets and some challenges for companies that want to be innovative in different ways. What are you seeing that makes you feel like the Great Resignation is coming here, and how far do you think that's going for the
Sure, I think it's the Great Resignation in Japan is still in its infancy, but at least in my company, I'm definitely experiencing it, unfortunately. So as employers, we have to work harder to keep our existing employees happy and to retain them. But at the same time, we need to, because fortunately I'm growing our company, our revenue is growing, so I need to add more headcount. But before the Great Resignation in Japan was already a seller's market in terms of labor, specifically bilingual talent. But things have gotten even worse. But what's ironic is during my past 20-some years in Japan, the starting salary for a college graduate in Japan hasn't changed. It's just remarkable. So I think companies now are going to have to start to pay more competitively in order to attract talent, not just mid-career hires, but also college graduates as well. And my second point to your excellent question is, I think there's going to be more employers in Japan are finally going to look at diversity, equity, and inclusion. If, for example, in the case of Costco, if you've been there, you've probably seen many non-Japanese workers there or cashiers. And I think that's an excellent model, Costco Japan, for giving those employment opportunities to non-Japanese here.
Gentlemen, are you seeing similar things, and how do you see the flexibility of the workforce?
Do you have any comment?
About the great resignation?
Either about the Great Resignation, if you are seeing people resign from your company or from other companies, or is there more flexibility coming into the workforce now?
As Julian already mentioned that Japan employees are usually protected, and while that I recently saw that my colleagues in America departed because of the Great Resignation, and in Japan usually they don't quit the company because they think about the company as a kind of their place to live until their elder stage. So when I asked to my team, Japanese team, most of them answered that they don't have a will to go outside Fujitsu. So that's the fantastic thing for the company, I think. So that's surprising for me as well.
I think for me as well, I think this, I'm not sure of your last question, Peter, but I think this may kind of bleed into that. And I think it's very, very fascinating that when I started working as a local hire 30 years ago, same salary as today. And but in those days, there really wasn't a lot of movement. Once you entered a company, you really, I mean, it wasn't unheard of, but mostly, you stayed with the company. And I think for me, one of the really interesting things about what's about to happen is, in Japan, the company is so much a part of the social structure. So, social insurance, pension, all of these things are really built into these constructs that have come out from, much more, whether it's agricultural, industrial kind of, long planning kind of phase. And we really are seeing, as was mentioned, there's a high demand for skilled workers, whether it's language or technology or whatever it might be. And the means for those workers to move have been increasing over the last 10 to 15 years. So there's a lot of movement at the top, we'll say, or in those areas where there's just not enough people. And a really interesting accelerator has been the last 2 years in a Corona environment where when I have a very small 15-person company, and in early 2020, I went to my, the person that I outsourced my HR to, and I said, I would like to institute a work-at-home program. Oh, it's impossible. It's so hard. You can't, you have to track the people, we have to put cameras at the houses. And, 3 months later, nobody can come, nobody can come. And it took the same, my same consultant, it took him about 10 days, it was a little later, maybe 4 months in, for him to put it together, right? And it's been such a catalyst for, now that people are working at home. I think in the past when, company is work and your interests are sort of outside of that, and you're going to be in that, company for a certain amount of time, it's a different feeling of career. And today, if you look at when a company needs something, there's a much more there's a higher willingness to go to, whether that be a part-time worker, whether that be a freelancer. There's a lot of those constructs are coming into place where that's not, not only is it a possibility, some companies have begun actively encouraging multiple jobs. So it's okay to work outside, and we're going to, here's how we're going to manage that. And I think this may lead into the next question of what do we see coming, if that's the final question. But
yeah, why don't we just go there now? So the question I was going to ask these guys, and I asked them about before, is what are your predictions for Japan in the future of the economic and business environment? Please go ahead.
And I think, there are a lot of reasons to be negative. And I have, my daughter, I'm a little bit older than Julie, and my daughter just turned 22. She just started working, and I really worry because she mostly grew up here. She's really Japanese in, most important senses. And I really worry about, what is Japan going to look like in 15 or 20 years if we keep going the way we're going? But one of the things that gives me hope is not just the internationalization, but the current trends in people being able to, live their life in a little bit more distributed manner. It's not so much dependent on the company. And I think those trends will continue and get faster, and it's really going to allow a higher degree of interaction between, the people who are living and working in Japan versus people living and working overseas. And it's going to open up opportunities in a way they just haven't been there before. So it's kind of a vague answer to the question, but I do think that, the changing roles of, company and the changing work styles really is going to make major changes here that we'll see, sooner rather than later because of distributed and working at home.
Can we go to Komeda-san and then we'll finish with you?
Okay, my experience is that, the thing is changing, I believe, and that for the foreign-based companies, employees are always in advance of the Japan company. And for example, of the IT industry, for example, for me, so I'm over the 20 years employment in American-based company, and my culture is totally on foreign-based, not the Japanese company. And I, changed my job twice. That is actually, not, not many, but some people already changed the job 10 times. And when that, many of people change the job, then it becomes like one single IT company in Japan rather than one company, so that everyone coming from a Microsoft, Amazon, Oracle, or any other companies becomes one single company, and oh, your friend knows this person and this person, so they are all connected, and I'm feeling like it's like one single company in Japan. So 株式会社日本 IT, yeah. So that's my feeling, and also I'm actually doing a lot of interview now for the new graduates of the Fujitsu. And when I hear to their opinion, the things is changing, and actually we just started job-based job-based career rather than kind of the career only within Fujitsu. And when they become job-based, then that they try to think about career based on job, so like marketing or the engineering, and also they are many of them have a interest in social issues, like sustainability, or the about nuclear issues, or something like that, and they have a mind of the how they want to solve the social issues, and they try to go to the place that they can resolve the issue. So the mind I got feeling from them, the new graduates, the generation Z, is as such. So I believe that they are becoming global. They can the young guys in young people in Japan can start speaking English as well, and the sense is becoming global and diverse. So that's one of the hope I have for the younger generation.
Thank you.
And, Peter, the question was, what are my predictions for Japan? First of all, I predict that the fax machine will be obsolete.
Like in the rest of the world.
I've been saying that. Yeah. I've been asked many. I've been talking about this for the past 10 years. Just earlier today, I was down the street at Yurakucho, where there's a big retailer called Big Camera, and lots of electronics, which I love. But they still sell fax machines there. You have a choice of like 4 or 5 different models made by companies such as Brother. But in all seriousness, digitalization, I predict that the 2 other panelists spoke about it, but it's going to be accelerated in Japan, definitely. Some personal experience. Earlier this year, I received a vaccination voucher ticket from the city where I live, but it wasn't emailed to me. It was mailed by snail mail. It's incredible that still the government ministries in Japan, they're still operating in a pre-digital world, just unthinkable. Recently some refugees from Ukraine have come to Japan, thankfully, and the Japanese government is going to give them work visas, which is great. But the Japanese ministry is going to mail a postcard to each refugee at their temporary. It's 2022. It's unbelievable. But my final prediction is for business-wise, I think Japanese companies are going to be divesting more of their non-core assets. In Japan, M&A or specifically divestments have been like a taboo subject for large Japanese companies. But it can be very respectable if there's a business unit that's not core to your company, or if it's a family business that you either created or you inherited, from your grandparents, divesting that to another company. I think that's going to accelerate in the future, and it's going to create more opportunities for Western companies. There's just so much fragmentation in Japan. I started off talking about the food retail business, which has been fragmented for decades, but many industries in Japan have all these small, medium-sized enterprises, which are very good, they contribute to the economy, but it creates inefficiency in the market by having so many players, and I predict that's going to change in the future.
Great. Thank you very much. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your time and your comments. Very insightful, very thoughtful. Really appreciate it. And thank you all for being here tonight and for your time. I think that's it. Yeah, thank you. Any last questions before we break? Oh, please, go ahead. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Irene from Deloitte. I work in this building. So, my question is that if, for example, you have someone whom you care about and asks you, I would like to enter the Japanese market, and maybe as a startup owner or like as a country manager of a bigger company, what single advice would you give that person, which you think you wish that somebody has told you back when you were younger? So this would be addressed to all three of them. One single advice, most important advice that you think is like would help that person a lot. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the question. Please, who would like to go first?
Okay. So the question is that for the advice for the person who are who are thinking about to be the country manager, right?
Either as a country manager or like maybe making a startup.
Okay. So my advice is that for their HQ, if there's a HQ in U.S. or the other countries, then I would suggest that if the CEO understands the difference of the culture and especially for the Japan, understanding for the Japan, and if he or she have a will to invest to Japan, and or he or she loves Japan. So that would usually make a significant difference when I observed, several startups from the foreign countries. So if they invest to the Japan market more, when they start the business, then the business becomes very good. However, it depends on the amount of the investment. So I would like to, advise that first look into that point.
Yeah, I think for me as well, it's very hard to find that one thing. But if the person is looking at bringing a business or coming to Japan or perhaps becoming a representative of a company that's coming in, the most important thing I would think, if they have not spent time, is come to Japan for as much as reasonable, and understand a little bit about the environment, and if possible, if you know who your customer is going to be, find a few of those and talk to your potential customer, and understand how are you going to solve their problem or give them a service, or how are you going to make their life better. And then I think by doing that, there's a lot of work to go figure out, okay, how am I going to do it? But knowing what it is you think you need to accomplish, I think it's impossible if you don't have experience in Japan, or I think it's actually impossible. I think, as Komeda-san also said, you need to spend a little bit of time here, and if possible, love Japan, but at least try to understand what the environment is here.
Yes, thank you, Irene, for that very good question. But you said I have to choose one. If I had to choose just one, something I could tell my younger self 20 years ago is, as country manager, try not to be Japanese or too Japanese. So I think earlier in my career, I lost my American side and really was trying to not just learning Japanese, but maybe my mannerisms, or I think maybe I was very modest at the time. But I learned that I shouldn't pretend to be like Japanese. I think I should just work my American traits and not hide that, and be bold and don't be so conservative. So that's be yourself is my advice. Thanks, Irene.
Thank you so much for that very good question. Thank you for that answer. I'm happy to hear that you've lost your modesty now that you've had much success. That's great to hear. I have do we have one more question? Are you pressing her into duty here? I feel like maybe this is not okay. Okay. All right. Are we okay on time? Yeah? Okay. Thank you. Please.
Here comes the hard ball.
Yes,
Hi.
right. Yes.
I'm Yuri. I have one question. Probably it's going to be last. So in like 10 years or 5 years, probably, will you invest to start up the company in Japan again? are we still, attractive? Well,
Sorry,
we,
are you talking about now, or are you talking about
well,
in 5
probably
years from
5
now?
years later, because we have a lot of barriers still, like language-wise, and as you already told, we care to the reputation of the company before we are starting business. So that's a lot of barriers we have. So do you still, investigate in 5 years? I mean, 5 years later, will you?
Yeah, Yuri, I'll answer first before the other two panelists. But yes, Japan is still a very attractive market for Western companies. For my company, we're continuously investing in Japan as a chemical manufacturer. But in other industries, I spoke about digitalization. For example, the wooden chop, the corporate chop that companies use and individuals use. So it's opportunities for companies such as DocuSign, which is an American company they're able to digitalize those signatures, which are secure. There's also opportunities. Look at the aging society in Japan. So the medical device market, the American companies, especially in Minnesota, your hometown, Peter, they're very excel in that area. So I think there's a lot of opportunities. Also defense. There's been some changes to the Japanese constitution, which now allows Japanese companies to export so-called dual-use products, which have some military applications. But that represents many opportunities for American subcontractors in the defense industry.
I think for me as well, absolutely, Japan is one of the, in some ways it can seem like the most difficult market because of language and culture and these things, but on the other hand, the Japanese mindset, in my experience, is very willing to buy, very interested in new products, very willing to buy products that they perceive value. It's not so much about cost in many cases, much more about what am I getting that I want. And Japanese customers are very, very proactive in making those kind of transitions. So I think it's an extremely attractive market to be in. I don't see that would change. Komeda-san, do you have any comment?
Yeah, as a Japanese, pure Japanese, I I still hope that Japan market have a big and attractive attitude. Yeah, from the other foreign companies.
Yes.
Yeah, GDP is still the third in the world, and the China market is a little bit harder to do. So I think it's literally the second biggest GDP country, and I hope that it is still attractive.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. Thank you so much. Okay, and we will leave it there. I have honorary memberships for our 3 guests. I'll give that to them. Please, a round of applause for our guests. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. And thank you for coming tonight. Thank you for your support.